You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is Monday. It is 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern. It is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go beyond our traditional markets of your Apple options and your Teslas and your SPYs and your VIX and all that fun stuff, and check out what's lighting up the tape over there in the realm of crypto. Going to talk, of course, Bitcoin, the options, the futures, the SKEW, the vol, all that good stuff, as well as ETH and a bunch of the other fun products lighting it up out there this week. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the aforementioned network, reminding you we have a slew of new listeners coming to the network and indeed to this program all the time. Make sure you help them find a path to our door here. We'll be their lighthouse in these troubled times. So keep rating and reviewing this content wherever you get it. It really does help the new folks, and they are legion these days. It really does help the new folks discover the content. Of course, keep those questions and comments coming too. We do love to hear from all of you out there. And let's see who we're hearing from on the old program today. It is time to roll out the Crypto Hot Seat.
Forget about cold storage. It's time to turn up the heat on thought leaders from the world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time to take their place on the Crypto Hot Seat.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Hot Seat, the portion of the show where we welcome on guests from throughout the world of crypto derivatives and indeed beyond and proceed to pick their brains for the benefit of you, the listener. And next up on the program is a newcomer to the show and indeed to the network. He is Zach Dexter, the co-founder and CEO over there at LEDGERX. Zach, welcome to the Crypto Rundown program.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And Zach, as we are wont to do with all of our first-timers here on the network, why don't you go ahead and give our audience a little bit of an overview of your background in the crypto space and how you found your way to becoming the CEO there at LEDGERX.
Yeah, so I was working in New York City as a consulting software engineer around 2013 and saw Bitcoin developing and actually got connected with a couple of former traders from the traditional finance space who were looking to start a derivatives platform. At the time, I thought that was totally crazy, and in retrospect, it probably was, but we were actually able to fill out all of the CFTC's designated contract market and derivatives clearing organization paperwork and spent a few years getting an exchange and clearinghouse for Bitcoin options approved. That took about 3.5 years. At one point, shortly after our approval, I actually left the company to go work at Mirror, which is a direct-to-consumer fitness startup of all things, and then rejoined LEDGERX last year. Since then, we've done about 10x customer growth. We've made significant headway on launching some Ethereum options, and we've got a totally new trading platform. So happy to be here and talk about crypto options.
Yeah, it's a fun time to be talking about said crypto options. Speaking of fun times, you kind of just rejoined the firm back in January of last year. So maybe some inauspicious timing there. Walk us through what that was like, coming back to the company, taking over as CEO, right pretty much as the pandemic was kicking off there, Zach.
Yeah, I think we experienced in a microcosm many of the issues that a lot of other companies in the New York City area did when COVID was hitting. We were sitting in a rather expensive midtown office space with all on-site employees, and I saw that thing coming and decided we got to cut and run. We had a physical custody system for the Bitcoin that was tied into our office. We actually switched that to BitGo almost overnight in a totally safe way. Significantly increased the insurance coverage that was available, cut the office out. Now we're down in Miami. We're a remote company with about 25 employees all over the world. Much lower cost structure, much happier people, and I think a lot of growth coming out of the pandemic. So it's been a tough time for a lot of people, but for us, with the volatility in the markets going crazy and the asset class we're in a weird way, it was actually sort of a boon and a boom time for us after some initial financial struggles, I think, related to the onset of the pandemic.
Yeah, I have to imagine it was boon times. Let's get into that. Of course, I know a lot of our audience has been champing at the bit for a while. They've been bugging us, get LEDGERX back on. Last time you had you guys on was in October of 2019, so about a year and a half ago. A lot has changed in that time. As you mentioned, of course, the pandemic kicking off last year. That was a big one. But this year, 2021, has also just been, especially through the lens of crypto, I think the technical term has been insane. We've seen, the rise of Doge. We've seen Musk and Tesla getting intermingled with Bitcoin. We've seen volatility moving all over the place, volumes, price levels that no one outside of a handful of people really expected to be seeing anytime soon. So there's been a lot of insanity going on in the world of crypto, particularly this year. You kind of touched on it earlier, Zach, but catch us up. It's obviously been a while since we chatted with you folks. What's the past year, and particularly what's this year, 2021, been like from a customer and indeed a volume perspective? What kind of action are you guys seeing on the platform these days?
Yeah, there are a few key drivers for the changes in 2019 and 2020. One was what I like to call the regulatory flippening, where the regulators in some of the more highly regulated jurisdictions started cracking down on unlicensed platforms. And we actually got a bit of an uptick in user activity from that, because now people have got to go to a properly registered platform with proper oversight that has all the appropriate licensing. So I think that was good for anyone who's been doing it the right way all along. Another thing that was tremendously helpful was just volatility. I mean, exchanges, I think, are long volatility in general. And the way the markets have been unfolding with the run-up of Bitcoin from 3K to 60 plus, that's been good for everyone. For people who think it's going to zero, they picked up some cheap puts, and we'll see how that plays out for them. But for most people, I think they're coming on, they're saying, all right, well, I've got my centralized yield platforms. I can go there. I can earn 3%, 6%. I've got DeFi. I can go stake in whatever Badger in a pool that exposes me to some smart contract risk, and maybe the APY shows up as 100% plus. But I've got to take on significant risk that maybe I do or do not fully understand, that maybe can be insured, maybe can't be insured. Where do I go if I want a proper regulated Bitcoin product where I just have the coins and I go sell call? And for us, that narrative has been huge over the past year, especially with the massive increase in retail options trading driven by the Robinhood revolution. So again, I think it's just the regulatory flippening was a positive. There was the Robinhood revolution and all the retail call option buying, which for us really, I think, led to more call selling. And we're actually up 13x on the number of customers since I took over, which is just, I mean, it's been huge. We haven't done really any marketing to date. We've been kind of operating in the shadows, just growing the business.
I like that. The regulatory flippening. I may have to borrow that from you, Zach. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like that out there.
Yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened in 2019, 2020. That was the big story.
You know, it's interesting. It's pretty much the number one question we get whenever we post a show, and it has been pretty much since day one, is where can I trade these Bitcoin options things? And for a long time, you know, the answers were few and far between for the lion's share of our audience, which is, of course, domiciled here in the U.S. And we talk about venues like DEREBIT and things all the time, but they're, of course, not really viable for our U.S. audience. So CME listed options, that's, of course, a much bigger, much beefier 5X contract. But you guys were kind of early on the scene, and they're still one of the only players, as you mentioned, from a regulated option for our U.S. audience. And you've created products that are a little bit more, shall we say, suitable to a lot of the retail audience out there, which are the mini size contract. Why don't you walk us through exactly what you guys offer over there at LEDGERX, contract sizes, and maybe how it differs from some of the other options out there, pun intended, Zach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the first important difference with us is actually something totally under the hood, not even related to the contract specs. Is we've got a brand new tech platform that's just direct to consumer. It's just direct clearing. If you look at the whole Robinhood DTCC incident in the legacy financial system, there are many hops between where you place your trade and where it gets cleared, which basically means where the risk is held, where the collateral behind the position is held. And those hops, that intermediation can result in inefficiency. So we've got a direct clearing model where we are the exchange, we are the clearinghouse, we are the DTCC, if you will, and we're also the execution platform. So that allows us to have an instant feedback loop. So as a result, you don't have to go to a broker and onboard with the broker. That can sometimes take months if you want to trade some of the other commodity derivatives products. You just sign up. It takes 3 minutes. We scan your face using your webcam and compare it to your government ID. We do a bunch of biometric verifications, and you can be up and trading as soon as your first Bitcoin gets 6 confirmed. So once you do that, basically log on and you can trade options, weekly options all the way out to December 2022 at this point, with strikes from 5,000 to 400,000 USD, and you can trade them in 1/100th BTC increments. And the contract size is actually 1/100th of a BTC. It's a nice little bite-sized mini option. Not everybody's going to have a $50,000, financial asset. And especially as Bitcoin gains institutional adoption, I think it's important to be able to offer these basic hedging tools to the broader market instead of saying, okay, well, this is now kind of a product for the elite. It's got a huge contract size. You've got to have 250,000 plus in capital to collateralize your position. I mean, that's just not a way to allow retail to participate in the market. So I feel like it's an appropriate contract size. We may actually end up seeing that get smaller as the market cap and the value of the token grow.
Yeah, it certainly has been an interesting one to watch. Like you mentioned, 0.01 Bitcoin out there is the contract size, which I think for a lot of our listeners is far more relevant, far more viable, far more useful than, let's say, 5X, a contract that is already hovering around the 50,000 level. That gets pretty pricey, as you mentioned out there. And I'm curious, you have a lot of customers coming in. You mentioned selling calls earlier. What kind of trades can I get up to over there at LEDGERX? How sophisticated does it get from an options perspective? Is it pretty much limited to just buying and selling puts and calls? Can I get a little bit more advanced? What are my options, pun intended, on the platform?
So if you're an eligible contract participant under the CFTC rules, you are able to enroll in a collateral netting program, which will let you post the maximum potential loss of your portfolio on a portfolio-wide basis, but it's still fully collateralized. So the idea is, all right, this is a new asset class. We want to go down the right road with the regulators. We want to take it slow, take it easy. We're not going to offer 100x leverage, right? We're going to do fully collateralized options. So if you got a whole Bitcoin, you can come in and sell a call on 100 units. That by far is the most popular trade. One of the things that I think we're working on is getting some of the Bitcoin haters on the platform. I mean, I love Bitcoin haters because they provide some of that two-sided flow for the puts. We do have a bunch of those people. I'd like more of them. The more you dislike Bitcoin, the more welcome you are to LEDGERX. So I think that's one of our goals for 2021 is getting the word out about the options product. I mean, the other thing I'd say is it's the options trading in general in the U.S. is kind of a tough nut to crack. It took a long time for these markets to spin up in general. And I think Robinhood has done everyone a huge favor in terms of consumer education. Now more people know what they're doing with respect to kind of the basic hedging and speculation tools that are available. So, I think thank you to them, and everyone in the option space owes them a bit of a debt of gratitude for doing some customer education. But that said, I think we want to keep the complexity to a minimum, given how new the asset class is. And here in the U.S., we're not really looking to build a casino. We're looking to build a place where people can come in and generate yield based on their economic view, right?
I love it. Bitcoin haters are welcome at LEDGERX. That should be front and center on your website there,
The more
Zach.
the better.
I think that would get you
The more the better.
That would get you some traction out there. But you already kind of touched on one of the questions I was curious about. What is the hot trade out there? We hear a lot of talk on various platforms, people loading up about calls, and the call SKEW is always pretty strongly bid on a lot of these platforms, particularly as you get farther out. But it sounds like on LEDGERX, it's the premium harvesting. It's the selling of the calls against the Bitcoin. I'm sure that probably has something to do with the fact, Zach, that your contracts are physically settled.
That's exactly right. A lot, in fact, the vast majority of the active users on the platform. I mean, if you look at any of the options platform, they really do most of their volume on a relatively moderate number of highly active users. And in our case, those are the people who have the collateral, the people who are fundamentally long Bitcoin and want to hedge their exposure and generate some income. The call override is a perfect trade for that. I mean, we've seen the pattern repeat itself, year in, year out. As volatility increases, people will kind of build up their positions and then they'll kind of exit for a profit. So I think it's an incredibly popular trade. It's very tax efficient. We did a 1099B run this year, which was a lot of fun. So we got a kind of a peek at the tax treatment of the products. And I think it's ideal for the long holder who's actually got an underlying view on the asset class, as opposed to somebody who's just coming in and looking to make a quick buck. I think the cash settled product is right for that kind of person.
Yeah, why did you decide to go that route initially? Because like you mentioned, a lot of the other platforms are cash settled. There's benefits and drawbacks to both. You guys are one of the few really playing in the physically settled arena. Was it simply to attract that flow, to attract that covered call, writer, order flow, or was there more to it, Zach?
There's much more to it. I mean, the ability to move dollars around, I mean, there's nothing harder to do in the world sometimes. In crypto, you just send it and either it's there in 6 confirms or it's not. I mean, reorgs aside, there's really no way to mess that up. With moving dollars around, you can only do it when the banks are open. We wanted people to be able to trade 24/7. You can't move dollars 24/7, except on some of these new, proprietary transfer systems at some of the newer banks like Signature and Silvergate. But I mean, really, the U.S. needs to upgrade its fiat infrastructure. And that's the reason why we chose to do physical settlement, is it's so darn hard to move dollars around. And in a 24/7 market, you don't want to be trying to move dollar collateral around at 3 a.m. To prevent your position from being blown out, right? I mean, you really need either stablecoin collateral or physical Bitcoin collateral. The dollar thing, I think, is kind of a relic of the 9-to-5 traditional markets that were centered around, kind of the crop cycle, the agricultural cycle, traditional futures expiries. I mean, it's just so tough to move around funds via ACH or wire compared to Bitcoin. That played a huge part of that decision.
You mentioned something else which always fascinates me and I love about the crypto option space versus the traditional option space where we spend most of our time. In the traditional world of options, your apples, your spies, et cetera, you have to wait 24 hours to see what the open interest is and how the changes have affected the open interest. Not so in the world of crypto, Zach. It's very refreshing to be able to come in, look at a product, and be able to actually track the open interest changes hours by hours, Zach. It's so much more refreshing to see it that way. And hopefully that's something that we'll see in the crypto space that will eventually spread its tendrils into the traditional world of options, Zach.
Yeah, I think the traditional world might end up just getting totally eaten by this stuff, but not in the way that people are thinking. I think by the time that the traditional players catch up to real-time margin, 24/7 margin calculations, 24/7 funding rate payments for perpetual products, I mean, by the time this stuff happens in traditional finance, I think all the stocks are going to be tokenized and trading on these DeFi platforms that are linked in to the regulated world via brokers. So that's going to be interesting. We'll probably see something similar in options. I really expect DeFi to start adding regulatory bridges as opposed to the traditional players to start adding DeFi bridges. So I think it's going to play out a lot faster than people expect, and you'll be able to get real-time free data on options, futures, swaps, other derivatives for any asset class within the next 3 to 4 years, to be honest.
Yeah, from your lips to the market's ears there, Zach, that would certainly be fascinating as well. One thing I want to hit on, too, a little bit of a difference between your products and what maybe some of our traditional audience may be familiar with is they're used to having their options auto-exercise when they tick, let's say, a nickel in the money. That is not the case on your platform. A LEDGERX, it has to be manually authorized to exercise, correct?
Yeah, that's the case right now. We actually want to change that. I think it's a little tough for folks to have to go in there and remember to exercise their option because it puts a huge burden of responsibility on the user to know, not only do I understand the payoff diagram here, but I also understand the funds flow and that I've got to have my wire done by a certain time in the day. And I mean, it brings this whole fund management side of things that typically you would see like a fund admin doing to the individual retail trader's account. And I think that can be a little frustrating for people. So that's definitely something we want to improve in one way or another.
I could talk about the options all day, but as you mentioned, you also offer some other products over there at LEDGERX, including futures and swaps. Why don't you give an overview for our audience of what else you offer outside of the options realm, Zach?
Yeah, so the futures right now, we do have monthly futures on BTC. It's a fully collateralized product, so it's pretty limited in terms of the use case. But on the swap side, we're actually the cheapest way to buy BTC. It's like 5 cents a Bitcoin. A lot of the other spot trading platforms have a gigantic fee when you go and buy a BTC. If you go to LEDGERX, it's a swap. It's a next day swap. You can receive Bitcoin at 4 p.m. Eastern, or if you sell at Bitcoin, you can receive the dollars now. Because it's a derivatives product, it's a little easier to stand up from the product and regulatory side, and it's an incredibly cheap way to leg into a Bitcoin position and then go sell some calls on that.
Well, speaking of things outside of the world of crypto options, we've had someone you're familiar with, I know, over there, Simon Ho from T3 Index. He's been on the network many times. He's been on this program many times. In his most recent appearance a few months back, he was very excited that his new BITVOL index, aka the Bitcoin Volatility Index, actually had an options trade go up there at OTC. I know this is an area LEDGERX has been interested in for some time, trying to create the equivalent of a VIX for Bitcoin. Zach, and I'm curious, why is this an area that LEDGERX wants to play in? Why is Bitcoin volatility so interesting to you guys?
Yeah, I think it's, we started with Bitcoin because we're familiar with the product and we have a way for people to express a view on volatility more indirectly through the futures and options. But I've always thought it would be cool if you could just buy and sell volatility directly. Like with the VIX, options, and futures, you're sort of using a derivative instrument that the retail investor may or may not understand. What would be cool in the longer term is if you could have perpetual exposure to volatility via a cash settled perpetual product that, maybe at first it's on Bitcoin, but maybe we can get into equities later on. And really the motivation behind BITVOL was to start accumulating that data and that history and start refining an index and make it high quality enough that we could list a volatility perpetual on it down the line. So just to be totally transparent about our product intentions there, I think it would be really interesting to see in the U.S. market, okay, if we were to offer something where people can directly buy or sell volatility, what is the impact of that? Does that see a huge uptick? Is that the most interesting product out there? I think there's a good chance of that. Now, is Bitcoin the right underlying for directly buying and selling vol? I mean, probably last year, yeah. We'll have to see what happens with the crypto focus shifting to some of the newer assets, if it sort of settles into a digital gold position or continues to be a way to express broad market volatility.
And I know you already put up an OTC options trade, which is fascinating. A little bit of putting the cart before the horse. You have the options going up before you really even have an underlying. But for our listeners who are intrigued, and I know we have a lot of listeners in the volatility space, when can they reasonably expect to have a product they can trade, an option, a future on this BITVOL index?
I think we're actually going to go for the perpetual product. So that is going to require a good bit of regulatory work on our end. In the United States, the reason why you don't see the most popular product in crypto, which is the perpetual, is really that no one has tried to list it before. It's probably considered a contract for difference or close to a contract for difference. If you look overseas, the vast majority of the trading volume is actually in perpetual products. They're easy to trade. They're fun to trade. So I don't think it'll be an option or a future. I think we're going to file an application once we're ready with the regulators to ask them they please review and consider our volatility perpetual among other perpetual products. So that's probably the form it'll take. It's probably a little premature to talk about timing, but we're a startup. Everything as fast as possible, and you got to give the regulatory process some time to kind of digest and work through anything that's a little new.
Well, speaking of time, Zach, we are coming to the end of ours. I appreciate you joining us here on the Crypto Hot Seat today. But before we go, we like to leave our audience always wanting more, Zach. We already kind of gave them some hints, some teases, but perhaps if there's something else you have up your sleeve you want to leave with our audience as a bit of a hint or of a tease of what's coming down the pike from you and the team over there at LEDGERX, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks very much. We're going to add a market maker program, Ethereum products, IRA accounts, donor advised fund accounts. But our primary goal is to add leveraged perpetuals on Bitcoin and Ethereum in highly regulated jurisdictions, the U.S. and Europe. And we intend to do that sometime over the next year. And we want to take that and become the first international clearinghouse with a 24/7 margin system on all asset classes.
I love it. Fascinating. Well, you folks have been asking us for ages to get LEDGERX back on. There you go, right there on the show for you. And Zach, I know a lot of our listeners already know, but we have a lot of newcomers coming on. So if they're intrigued by what you're talking about, they want to kick the tires and light the fires on your platform for themselves, where should they go? What should they do, Zach?
LedgerX.com, click View Live Markets. You can see all the options, prices, and sign up right there.
There you go. Check it out for yourselves. LedgerX.com. As we keep on rolling into our next segment, it is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, let's get to it. Time for the Bitcoin Breakdown. A lot to break down. A lot's been happening over the course of the past week. You know, we saw a little bit of, shall we say, weakness out there in the big dog, which is Bitcoin, since our last show. On the end of our last show, we were a little bit shy of the 56,000 level, 55,700. Coming into today's show, we're at 54,250, so about 1,400 handles difference to the dark side over the course of the past week. Of course, that doesn't tell the whole story. We saw quite the dramatic swings over the course of the past week. We saw Bitcoin get as high as almost 57,000, about 56,800, and drop as low as 47,200 and change. So pretty much breaking the 50,000 level for the first time in a little while, sparking a flurry of concern. Is this going to be the beginning of a downtrend, a bearish trend out there in Bitcoin? But it has since rebounded pretty strongly back into the mid to low 50,000 range. We'll see if we can hold it. Of course, a lot of talk about some Bitcoin beers getting liquidated over the course of the past 24 hours. Part of the reason why we saw this aggressive run back up, a little bit of a mini short squeeze out there. Some of these beers getting liquidated out there. But interesting stuff nonetheless. A lot to look into and a lot to sink our teeth into out here in Bitcoin land. Of course, all these analytics coming at you courtesy of our friends over there at Genesis. You know where to check them out. GVOL.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. Last show, we were talking about, can Bitcoin vol stay in this low range? I've been saying, it doesn't seem like Bitcoin is destined to languish in the low 70s, but it does. Lately, it has been performing like gold vol and other metals vol, where if it gets some signs of life, some sparks to it, and it certainly did over the past week, it's kind of short-lived, because we saw Bitcoin vol on the last show, 73.5%. Then it spiked all the way up to almost 90% during the heights of those sell-offs and those swings over the course of the past week. And then coming into today's show, right back down, actually below where it was this time last week. It's down to 71% at the start of our show today. So it seems like it wants to hang out in the low 70s, even though it can spike all over the place. It comes right back down to that low 70s range, which again is interesting and somewhat aberrant compared to what we've seen over the long history of Bitcoin from a vol perspective. These days, that digital gold conversation, at least from a purely volatility perspective, seems to be a little bit more of an apt comparison. 30-20 SKEW, same deal. A lot of action in that on our last show. It was almost -1, about -2/3 of a point or so. It spiked to about 4 on the positive end between shows here, and now coming into today's show was at about a 1 again. So kind of moving all over the place. The hourly open interest, interesting here because it was exactly 203,000 contracts on our last show. And coming into today's show, exactly 203,000 contracts again. So a lot of ebb and flow on there, but net, not a lot of movement from an OI perspective. That same story, actually a little bit lower, actually, on the notional Bitcoin OI front. Remember, that's, of course, the actual notional value of the open interest outstanding. And it's actually come in a bit since our last show. Last show, it was about 11 billion worth of notional volume open on DEREBIT. If you add in all the other venues, it got to almost 12.5 billion, about 12.3 billion. Now we're about $1 billion below that across the board, about 10 billion open on DEREBIT right now, and about 11.3 billion open if you add in all the other venues out there. It's kind of a hot and heavy fight for number 2 out there right now from a notional OI perspective. DEREBIT's obviously the big dog with 10 billion. But Bit.com holding on to number 2 with 391 million. CME just eking out number 3 there with 322 million. They're all kind of in that same 300 plus million range. Actually, number 4 is OKEX with 303 million, right edging out LEDGERX with 302 million. So your top 5 there are going to be DEREBIT with 10 billion, Bit.com with 391 million for number 2. Then we got CME number 3, 322 million. OKEX number 4. 303 million, and just getting edged out our friends from earlier in the show, LEDGERX, with 302 million for number 5. So hot and heavy fight for that number 2 spot right now. It's Bit.com holding firm to it. In terms of the calls versus puts, what kind of action do we get? You know, we've been saying for a little while, seems like the puts were starting to catch up a bit. That was the case. Now calls have kind of regained their distance again. The calls come into today's show, 114,500 open there. That's actually up about 1,500. Puts, only 92,000 of those. That's down about 6,000 from our last show. So puts, maybe the fact that we broke through the 50,000 strike, some folks took their puts off the table. They got the move that they needed out there. So that certainly could be the case. But either way, the puts getting a little bit lighter since our last show. You know, what wasn't lighter, though, was the volume out there. Another very active week. Once again, kind of pinning the needle in terms of notional volume out there. We've been talking about this 2 billion level for a while out there. Hit it again on the 22nd, hit it again on the 23rd out there. So just kind of pinning the needle in terms of pretty much at the highs right now from a volume perspective. We hit that again multiple times last week. I'm starting to wonder if some of these platforms can't keep up with the volume. They just pin at 2 billion. We'll have to dig in and see for ourselves. But either way, it's been fascinating to watch a lot of paper as we're swinging 10,000 plus points here over the course of the week in Bitcoin. From an overall monthly perspective, where are you folks lining up? Where's the size OI right now? It's still April. 68,000 contracts are open in April. That's the number 1 spot. That's up 4,000 from last week. Then June comes in at number 2 with 44,000 contracts open. That's pretty much unchanged from what it was this time last week. And then we got number 3, May, sneaking in there ahead of the other quarterlies like DEES or SEP or anything like that. May, 29,000 contracts open on the tape right now. So May starting to take a peek and look a little bit more active than it has over the course of the past weeks. In terms of where you guys are lining up from a strike perspective, it's kind of been all over the place lately in terms of where the action is from a Bitcoin strike perspective. We were talking about outlandish upside strikes a lot on the show of late. This week, not so much. It's a 60,000 strike in the number 1 spot with 15,300. That's down slightly from last week, but that's still kind of holding firm to the number 1 spot out there. Then we have no 50,000 strike, actually. So not the crazy 100 or even the 80,000 strikes, the 50,000 strike number 2 with 14,700 contracts open. That's down about 2,000. That's down quite a bit from last show. Number 3, finally, we start getting some of the, shall we say, crazier strikes there. 80,000 strike is number 3. 14,600. That's down about 1,200 contracts from last week. Number 4, back to a more relevant strike. 52,000 strike with about 9,700. And rounding out the top 5 of the sizable positions in Bitcoin options right now. You know, it had to be another weird one. It's the 100,000 strike, listeners, with 9,400 contracts. That's a newcomer to our top 5 here. So I don't have the change from week to week, but Interesting stuff. So we still have relevant strikes dominating things. It's not quite like ETH, but we do have a few outliers still floating in to the top 5. In terms of Bitcoin options over there on CME, actually an active week, probably one of the more active, if not the most active weeks we've seen out there. I know on our TWIFO show last week by Thursday, they've already done nearly 400 contracts. Doesn't sound like a lot, but as we said earlier in the show here, talking about LEDGERX, CME is kind of on the other side of that size equation there. They're a 5x contract. So Bitcoin at 50,000, you could do the math to see how pricey that gets. So doing 400 of those, that's actually decent paper. The busiest day was Friday, nearly 200 contracts, 185 contracts. That's probably a new record over there at CME. I'll have to check. And Tuesday, also a pretty active day with 120 contracts. So there you go, already over, just in those 2 days, over 300 contracts. So a decently active week last week. Good to see some more size starting to percolate out there. Also, we're talking about a mini contract coming. That'll hopefully spark a little bit more life to those contracts as well. Decent action out there on the futures front at CME as well. The most active day was actually Thursday last week with 16,500 contracts, followed by Friday with 15,000. The rest of the week also pretty active, but not quite at those levels. We can do a quick segue into the BAKKT volume bot if we really want, even though it's kind of depressing. Only 874 contracts on the tape as of our last update from the BAKKT volume bot. That puts it down 65%. And again, a far cry from their all-time high of nearly 19,000 contracts set back in the, doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but from a crypto perspective, it certainly was September of last year. Now it's time to keep on rolling. It is time to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, let's do it. Time to break down the altcoin universe. Let's start with our top 10, see if any crazy coins are still lurking in the top 10. Spoiler alert, yes. Number 10 on our top 10 here, Litecoin with about 16.5 billion. Again, take these market caps with a pretty big, pretty tasty grain of salt, but the rankings have some value. Number 9, Uniswap, 18.8 billion. Number 8, Polkadot, 30.6 billion. Number 7 is the one you're waiting for. It's Doge, 34.3 billion, even though it's come off quite a bit from its lofty highs of around 40 odd cents not too long ago. Coming into showtime was at about 26 cents. Cardano, we have 39.5 billion. Number 5, Tether, 50 billion, pretty much exactly. Number 4, XRP, getting a bit of a lift again this week, even though it's still below its levels of late. 57.7 billion. Number 3, Binance Coin, 82.6 billion. Numero dos, ETH, 289 billion. Number 1 with a bullet, it's Bitcoin, of course, with just a tick north again of the 1T level. Broke it to the dark side when we started selling off to 47,000, but coming into the showtime, it was back north of the 1T market cap level again. Let's get on out to the second biggest dog out there, which is ETH. Good week for ETH, up 331 points from our last show. We were kind of languishing in the 2170 level on our last show. Coming in today's show, 2,500, pretty much even. So a good run for ETH. And a little bit off the highs it's hit over the last 24 hours, which is about 25.33 out there. We had interesting run over the course of the past week for ETH. From an ETH options perspective, let's look at the vol first. We've been kind of wondering if ETH vol would kind of languish a bit. Again, last show it was 87.25. That's up a little bit. It's 84% now. And of course, between our shows, we saw ETH get a lot more frothy from a vol perspective, jumped up to 101%. So it's back over triple digits ever so briefly during the height of the sell-off, and then right back down again to where we are again this week, below last week's level at an 84%. 30-20 SKEW, same deal. Last show was negative 4.25. In between shows, it swung as low as negative 21 and as high as nearly 13 on the positive side before coming into today's show a little bit shy of the 6 handle, about 585 out there. In terms of volume, I think you could call it an insane week from an ETH volume perspective. Notional volume, we're setting new records out there all the time. Last week the big day was 448 million. That was a new high from a notional volume perspective. Blew the doors off that this week, nearly 2x, 851 million on the 22nd. So that's nearly double the new high we set just last show. So ETH rocking and rolling a bit this week. Again, that's a far cry from what we were seeing even back in March, 225 million worth of notional and things like that. Yeah, ETH's just on fire this week. From an open interest perspective, also growing quite a bit. Calls, 820,000 open right now. It's up 37,000 contracts from last week. The puts, 610,000 contracts. That's up 36,000 from last week. So that means the net hourly open interest also up from our last show. Last show, 1.35 million. This show, 1.39 million. So ETH feeling that love out there from the folks. Keep on rolling here. Let's break down OI by the month, because that's where I think a lot of the interest is for ETH, because ETH has been kind of fixated on the quarterlies since we've been watching it. And that's still the case right now. June number one, 390,000 contracts. That's up about 24,000 from last week. April number two, 318,000. That's up 32,000. That's a big gain for April. So April is fighting its way in amongst all the rest of the quarterlies, because number three is Deece with 234,000 up there. That's up about 3,000. So June and Deece, 1 and 3, but April fighting its way into the number 2 spot. So it's not all quarterlies all the time. It's just mostly quarterlies all the time. In terms of which strikes are dominating the tape, you can guess the number 1 and number 2. They really haven't changed in a long time in ETH. It's still the 400 strike with 63,000 contracts open. That's, again, unchanged from last week. And the 320 strike, number 2, with 62,000 contracts open. Again, unchanged from last week. Number 3, now we're getting a little bit more relevant. It's still that 1,600 strike. That one's kind of glued to the imagination out there. 59,800, almost 60,000 contracts, up nearly 3,000 from last week. So that's rallying a bit in our top 5 here. Number 4, the 2240 strike. That's up about 2,000 from last week. That's up to about 59,000 contracts open. And round out the top 5 is the 24 half strike, a newcomer to our top 5 here. That's got about 58,700. So we do have some relevant strikes in there. He's got to drop down a little bit beyond that 320,400. Perhaps a vertical is open there. Who knows what's open on those strikes, but craziness nonetheless. A lot of craziness out there in Ripple. It's had a decent run, even though it's down net 3 cents from our last show. XRP is one of those interesting ones. Some folks have written in saying they're trying to buy XRP on Kraken and they can't do it anymore. So that's interesting stuff, because Kraken kind of made their bones as being one of the places you can go in the U.S. to buy XRP. So interesting stuff afoot out there. Ripple down 3 cents from our last show. Bitcoin Cash down 85.5 from our last show. Bitcoin SV down about 41.5 from our last show. Doge, though, down about 12, almost 13 cents from our last show. All right, it's time for you folks to take the reins. Time to answer your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, let's get to it. Answer some of your questions. First off, we asked you guys a fun poll last week. The results are now in. We gave you 4 choices, trying to make a nice, easy one to wrap up the week last week. Quite simply, which level did people think we were going to hit first across the marketplace? So we could have VIX of 14, so a lower level of vol than we're seeing out there right now, or the S&P at 4,300, a higher level in the markets than we're seeing right now, or Bitcoin at an even 70,000, or WTI, the crude oil, at $70 a barrel out there. So kind of a smattering across the markets of what you folks thought. And it seemed like it was hot and heavy for Bitcoin very early. Bitcoin at 70,000 was running away with it early on. Then as the week progressed a bit, we saw votes coming in for the other platforms. So when the poll ended up, it was almost exactly evenly split. For a brief period there, it was 25% across the board for each. It ended up closing with VIX just edging out everything else. VIX at a 14, 26.3%, followed by the S&P at 4,300 with 25.3%. And then bringing up the rear, tied for number 3, actually, are Bitcoin at 70,000 and WTI at 70, both with 24.2%. So you crypto folks were hot and heavy early on. You couldn't maintain the lead for Bitcoin. I get it. Each of these is a pretty long way to go. So it's a question of which one is the most viable. It seems like right now, folks coalescing around the 14 level for VIX, but only ever so slightly. Again, that's kind of fascinating in and of itself. Shows opinion is very much split across these different products out there. Next up, we got a comment here from Nate. Nate Z says, great commentary on Dogecoin and something that all buyers should keep in mind. He sent us a link to an article, I believe this is from CoinDesk, about Dogecoin, where they say 65% of all Dogecoins are kept in just 98 wallets around the world. This is from a crypto risk management platform called TRM Labs. They said the single largest wallet has 28% of all Dogecoins, and 5 wallets control 40% of the entire Dogecoin supply. Is one of those Musk? Who knows? He certainly does talk it up quite a bit. But for all of you out there who needed yet another reason to perhaps be a little bit dubious about Doge, we've talked in the past. It was literally started as a joke, and it literally has no value behind it other than what the next person is willing to pay. So maybe add this fuel to your fire that, there's always this talk about Bitcoin whales and how they could easily disrupt the ecosystem if they decided to unload. Well, it's even more concentrated in Doge. 28% is in one wallet, and the top 5 wallets control a total of 40% out there. So all you out there who are diving into Doge, just a little bit more ammunition for you to analyze as you're slinging the Doge hot and heavy. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of the Crypto Rundown. I want to thank our guest, Zach Dexter, the CEO over there at LEDGERX. See, ask and you shall receive. Listeners, you want a LEDGERX on the show? We got them for you. If you have other guests you want to see featured on the program, hit us up. Let us know. You know where to find us, at Options on most of the major social media platforms. TheOptionsInsider.com. Also have a feedback and question form there. Just go the old-fashioned route. Questions at TheOptionsInsider.com. That also works. You have crypto questions, maybe a guest, or anything else on your mind. We'd love to hear from all of you guys and gals out there. Speaking of hearing from you, if you like what you hear, keep rating and reviewing on all the platforms. A lot of new listeners, and quite frankly, we're kind of the only game in town when it comes to analyzing the crypto derivative scene. So if folks are interested in this, help them find a way to our door. Keep rating and reviewing. It really does help. And I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, and subscribing. Of course, I want to thank our friends over there at Genesis Volatility. Check them out for yourselves. GVOL, GVOL.io, to kick the tires and light the fires on all these analytics I talk about here on the show, and a whole bunch more. GVOL.io is the place to go. Of course, we'll see you throughout the rest of the week. Interview Tuesday, tomorrow, coming at you hot and heavy. Multiple guests. Wednesday, of course, Education Wednesday, Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio. If you're listening to this show, you're confused on any of these terms we throw around here all the time, like open interest or SKEW or things, check out those Education Wednesday shows. They'll really help you out. Back again on Thursday with Twifo. Touch on some cryptocurrency there, so stay tuned for that one, as well as episode 2 of the Option Block. Friday, Volatility Views. If you like stuff like VIX and BITVOL, talk about all that fun stuff and a lot more on Volatility Views. And we're back again on Monday with another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.